cold sweet tea, and there were these baby snakes, and they were hissing in the pit. And so these baby snakes are hissing in the pit, and the mama snake came outside and said, "What are you baby snakes doing?" I said, "Well, we're hissing in the pit." She said, "We go down to Mrs. Potter's place and hiss in Mrs. Potter's pit." So the baby snakes slithered there through the desert, and there they were at Mrs. Potter's place, hissing in Mrs. Potter's pit, when Mrs. Potter came outside and said, "What are you baby snakes doing?" She said, "We're hissing in the pit." She said, "Well, you go home and hiss in your own pit." So the baby snakes slithered back to the desert, and I was watching this, and they were at home hissing in the pit when the mama snake came outside and said, "What are you baby snakes doing?" I said, "We're hissing in the pit." She said, "I thought we go to Mrs. Potter's place and hiss in Mrs. Potter's pit." Baby snake said, "We were at Mrs. Potter's place hissing in Mrs. Potter's pit when Mrs. Potter told us to go home and hiss in her own pit." Mama snake said, "How you like that? I knew Mrs. Potter when she didn't have a pit to hiss in."